Rising a Kuman Thong with blood, the Vietnam-Cambodia border is a strange land, where by day the sun beats down blindingly white like fire, and the moment night falls, a chill crawls out from the earth, from the trenches, from the dense thickets along the road, a slow, silent chill like the hand of a dead man resting on the back of a passerby's neck. In the dry season, the red earth cracks into long, winding fissures like stretch marks on the skin of an old beast. Dust billows up in blinding clouds whenever a motorbike passes, coating the thatched roofs, the faces of the people, and the faded tarps stretched haphazardly over the market. In the rainy season, the entire border strip turns into a bottomless quagmire. Muddy water overflows from the fields into the ditches, dragging along rotting leaves, garbage, bloated rat carcasses, and foul-smelling things no one dares to look at too closely. The Black River behind the village flows sluggishly year-round, slithering through the reeds like an ancient snake, silent by day but by night, the water sounds as if it is breathing, heavy, rhythmic gasps. On moonless nights from across the river you can occasionally hear the harsh squawk of night herons, the incessant croaking of frogs, and the dense hum of insects weaving a blanket of sound over the entire field. The elders in the village say this land is not clean. It used to be a battlefield. Human remains lie mingled in the mud. Some were buried hastily with just a few shovels of dirt. Some never had the chance to close their eyes, their mouths still gaping open as if trying to call out the names of their loved ones. Because of this, the smugglers passing through here all know a few taboos by heart. Do not pick up red cloth bundles left by the roadside. Do not whistle when walking through the forest late at night. Do not call each other by name when passing the old trenches. And if, in the middle of a deserted road, you hear a voice behind you calling your exact name, no matter how familiar that voice may sound, you must absolutely never turn your head. I grew up in that very land. I wasn't even 30, but my face was already gaunt, like a man whose youth had been half eaten away by the sun, the dust, and the crushing poverty. My eye sockets were hollow, my lips darkened by cheap tobacco, my skin burnt brown. My posture was always slightly hunched forward, like a man accustomed to walking into a headwind. My father died during the war. My mother told me he took a bullet while fleeing, collapsing by the edge of a trench where his blood mixed with the muddy water. By the time they carried him home, his body was already stiff and cold. My mother stayed a widow to raise me, spending her whole life toiling silently in the fields, planting for others, harvesting for others, taking whatever work she could find, picking up spare change like a bird pecking at dropped grain. From a young age, I knew the exact smell of poverty. It smelled like cold, leftover rice, like damp clothes hanging on a line, like eye-stinging kitchen smoke, like bitter medicine when my mother lay sick and curled up on our old bamboo bed. By the time I started learning how to trade, how to run the market, how to hoard smuggled cigarettes, old electronics, and bootleg liquor to sell across the border for a profit, I truly believed my life was about to get better. But just as I had scraped together enough money to fix our leaky roof, my mother fell ill and passed away at the beginning of winter. She left me a drafty, empty house, a few plots of barren land, and a bone-chilling silence. Ever since my mother died, every night I felt the house grow wider than before, even though it still only had the main room, a small bedroom, and the low, smoke-stained kitchen. The yellow bulb hanging in the middle of the house flickered intermittently, casting patchy, bruised shadows on the walls that looked like the skin of a diseased man. Every time the wind slipped through the cracks in the door, the wooden panels would creak, sounding as if someone were standing outside, gently pushing it open, inch by inch. I would go to the market in the morning, and at night I would toss my bags of goods into the corner of the house, sit down on the creaky bed, and count a few crumpled banknotes. On good days, I made enough for food and gas. On bad days I suffered a loss, left with nothing but cold rice and dried fish, chewing slowly while staring into the dark space behind my mother's altar. I wasn't afraid of hard work. I was afraid of living my entire life without anything ever changing, afraid of waking up to the same muddy road, seeing the same market at noon, returning to the same old house at night, and then one day dying and being hastily buried in the same old dirt, with no one to remember me, no one to mourn me beyond a few superficial words of pity. Poverty makes a person numb, but it also allows greed to take root. At first that root was very small, just a fleeting thought. If only I had money. Then gradually it dug deeper. If only I could change my life, at any cost. That morning, while the dew still cloaked the roadside grass in white, I pushed my rickety motorbike out of the yard. It had rained the night before, and the dirt road leading to the market was slick and gleaming with water. The tires splashed mud up onto my pant legs. From the shallow ditch rose the stench of a dead rat mixed with the smell of rotting leaves. In the distance, the crowing of roosters, the barking of dogs, and the voices of people calling out to each other from the scattered huts, blended with the heavy rumble of trucks out on the highway. The border market stretched along the wide dirt road, covered by a patchwork of makeshift tarps. Beneath them were stalls selling vegetables, fish, pork, loose tobacco, second-hand goods, smuggled wares. You could find anything, and everything was tainted with dust. Just as I parked my bike, I heard a voice calling softly from behind. "Lloyd, come over here and grab a coffee to wake up first." I turned and saw Fu sitting at a roadside stall, holding a hand-rolled cigarette, his eyes narrowed against the smoke. Fu was a smuggler too, around my age, but much more cunning, a smooth talker who always seemed to know some shortcut that others hadn't yet noticed. He wore a short-sleeved button-down shirt with the collar left open, an old silver ring on his finger, and a smile on his lips that never quite reached his eyes. I pulled up a chair and sat down, ordering a glass of thick black coffee. After taking just one sip, I asked, "Where have you been hiding lately? Haven't seen your face in a month." Fu took a drag of his cigarette and exhaled the smoke slowly. "I haven't been hiding. The goods just come and go. In this place, if you don't time it right, you'll starve." I gave him a side-eye. "You stumbled onto something good and didn't let the brothers know, didn't you?" Fu didn't answer right away. He looked down and stirred his coffee, the spoon clinking against the glass. A small sharp sound like metal tapping against bone. After a moment, he leaned in closer and lowered his voice. "Let me ask you something real. Do you want to change your life?" I let out a dry laugh. What a stupid question. Who doesn't want to change their life? But in this hellhole, what do you use to change it? Fu stared at me for a long time, then spoke every word as if pouring honey into my ear. "There is something. People raise it in their homes, treat it like a child. It guards your money, draws in fortune, and blesses your business. Across the border they call it a Kuman Thong. Around here a lot of people just call it the golden child." I frowned. "A Kuman Thong? Sounds like black magic." Fu nodded, his voice dropping even lower. "It is magic, but not the kind of charm you hang up just for fun. It's forged from the soul of a child. There's a master to guide it, a ritual to invite it, and a specific way to raise it. Raise it right, and the fortune comes incredibly fast. Your business booms, you find help wherever you go, and money just flows right into your hands." Hearing about the soul of a child, a chill ran down my spine, but hearing about the money, my chest grew hot. Those two feelings collided, making me want to stand up and walk away, yet simultaneously urging me to lean in closer and listen. I gritted my teeth. "Are you telling the truth? Using a kid's soul to make a charm?" Fu smirked. "How else would it be sacred? Some masters use the corpses of fetuses. Some use children who died young. When we invite it home, we have to treat it like our own flesh and blood. Feed it, give it drinks, call it to every meal. Sometimes you have to offer it milk, cakes, chicken blood, even your own blood. In return, it gives you fortune. Poor bastards like us, if we don't take a risk, how will we ever make it?" Outside the stall, a damp gust of wind blew in from the river, making the tarp overhead flap violently. The smell of mud, stale fish, and cigarette smoke tangled together. From the distant forest, the harsh, drawn-out caw of a crow echoed. I sat in silence. In my mind flashed my empty house, my mother's cold altar, the rickety motorbike, the meals of cold rice, the crumpled pocket change. What Fu was talking about was terrifying, but poverty was just as terrifying. Maybe even more so, because it didn't kill you in a single night. It killed you day by day for the rest of that day. I walked through the market with my soul hanging in mid-air. When people asked about my goods, I mumbled non-committal answers. When fellow vendors greeted me, I only nodded. The stench of fish sauce, the smell of raw meat, the sharp thwack of a knife chopping bone, the loud haggling of the crowds, all of it felt pushed far away behind a thick veil of fog. In my ears, only Fu's voice echoed, "Raise it right and you get rich incredibly fast." Late in the afternoon, I returned home. The fading sunlight filtered through the cracks in the door, illuminating the old wooden table where my bowl of cold rice from that morning still sat. I stared at the bowl, watching the ants crawling around its rim, and suddenly felt a suffocating rage well up inside me. With a sweep of my hand, I knocked the bowl to the floor. It shattered with a crash, sending rice scattering everywhere. I kicked the chair with a loud bang and cursed out loud. But after the noise died down, the house fell dead silent again. So silent that I could clearly hear the wind slipping through the walls, the insects chirping out by the field, and the dry, hollow beating of my own heart inside my chest. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay down, then sat up, then went out to the porch to smoke. Rain suddenly battered the tin roof, a relentless downpour, each drop whipping against the walls with a sharp ticking sound, like someone tapping their fingernails. I stared out into the pitch-black yard, telling myself that the worst-case scenario was just losing a bit of money. But what if it was real? If it was real, I could escape this mud-stinking wasteland. If it was real, I wouldn't have to bow my head to anyone ever again. Near dawn, when the cigarette smoke had left my throat raw and stinging, I picked up my phone and called Fu. It rang and rang. When the familiar, raspy voice answered on the other end, I only said one sentence. That thing from yesterday, take me to see the master. That afternoon, Fu drove me out to the edge of the forest. The further we went, the narrower the dirt path became. The wild grass on either side grew taller than a man, and thorny bushes whipped painfully against my legs. The sun sank gradually behind the tree line, dark clouds gathered from the horizon, and the wind blowing out of the woods carried the damp scent of rotting leaves and a sickly sweet metallic odor, like dried blood. The sounds of the market, the vehicles, the people, they all faded away, leaving only the droning of forest cicadas and the swelling hum of insects that sounded like 1,000 whispering voices. I sat on the back of the bike, gripping the seat tight. Several times I wanted to ask if it was still far, but the words choked in my throat. Finally, the bike stopped at the foot of a small slope. At the top stood an old wooden house, its tiled roof covered in moss, its walls blackened by sun and rain, with vines winding around the porch like dried veins. The yard was littered with jagged rocks and gnarled tree roots that protruded from the earth like the crooked fingers of the dead. A few broken clay jars lay scattered about, filled with pools of black, foul-smelling water. Under the porch, several skeletal cats with bright yellow eyes stared at us, letting out a long, spine-chilling yowl before vanishing into the shadows. I swallowed hard. This is the master's house. Fu killed the engine, his voice dropping to a whisper. From now on, keep quiet. Do exactly what the master says. The wooden door creaked open. An old man stepped out. His body was as thin as a twig, his white hair hanging loose over his shoulders. His eyes were clouded over, yet so piercingly cold that I felt as if they were staring right through my flesh. He wore a frayed brown tunic draped with a black cloth, a string of dark wooden beads around his neck, and in his hand he held a bamboo cane carved with strange symbols. Fu bowed his head in greeting. The old man didn't speak. He only cast a fleeting glance at me before turning back inside. The interior of the house was dark and heavy with scent. The smell of sandalwood, incense, mildew, stale oil, and rotting meat all mingled together, making my stomach churn. Bizarre paintings hung on both walls. Images of children with distorted faces, half-human, half-beast figures with glaring eyes, gaping mouths, and elongated tongues. In the corners of the room sat numerous sealed clay jars, plastered with red and yellow talismans. Every now and then, a faint sound echoed from within them, like something gently scratching against the clay. In the center of the room was a low wooden table draped in black cloth, holding an incense burner, a dried chicken head, small bronze statues, and glass jars filled with dark liquids where twisted shapes resembling animal fetuses floated suspended. I stood frozen, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of my neck. The old master sat down on the wooden bed platform and tapped his cane against the floor 3 times. Thud, thud, thud. The sound echoed deeply, as if vibrating up from beneath the earth. This one wishes to invite something not meant for the weak. Is that right? My voice trembled. Yes, I want to request a charm. The old man closed his eyes, his bony fingers tapping a steady rhythm on the table. A moment later he stood up and opened a black wooden chest in the corner. The chest looked like a child's coffin. As soon as the lid cracked open, a pungent fishy stench rushed out. Inside lay several small, hand-sized red cloth bundles, tied shut with black thread. The old man took one bundle and placed it on the table. If your guts are big enough, open it. I looked at Fu. Fu remained silent, the corner of his mouth slightly raised as if waiting to see if I would run away. I knew that if I backed down now, I would forever remain poor little Loy in the eyes of my fellow smugglers, and in my own eyes too. I reached out and touched the cloth bundle. An icy chill shot straight up my spine. I undid the black thread. The cloth fell open. Inside was a small clay statue of a newborn child. Its round eyes were painted a bright, terrifying red, and its mouth was curled into a grotesque, twisted smile. At that exact moment, every oil lamp in the house blew out. The darkness poured in, thick and suffocating. From all four corners of the room arose a chorus of faint, childish murmurs, as if hundreds of toddlers were whispering behind the walls. I went rigid, my hands trembling violently as I held the statue. The master's voice cut through the pitch black. "Hug it to your chest. If you don't dare, get the hell out." I gasped for air. In my mind flashed visions of money, a house, a vehicle, and the respectful gazes of the world. Then I gritted my teeth and clutched the statue tightly against my chest. In that very instant, an icy breath pierced through my skin and slipped into my ribcage. I heard the tiny, frail cry of a baby, "Wah, wah," not coming from the room but echoing right from the inside of my own chest, right next to my heart. I turned pale. The oil lamp suddenly flared back to life. The master nodded slowly. "Your guts are not small. From now on, it is your child." The ritual began. The old man placed the statue on the table, draped a red cloth speckled with brown stains like old blood over it, and brought out a bowl of black rice, a vial of thick red oil, a few small crooked bones that looked like a child's knuckles, and a smoke-stained yellow talisman. He asked for my birth date and time, then began chanting in a strange guttural language, drawing out the syllables like a dead man reciting prayers from the bottom of a well. The incense smoke rising in the air did not float straight up. Instead, it coiled itself around the statue in gray, twisting rings. The master drew a small knife, sliced the tip of his own finger, and let a drop of blood fall into the statue's mouth. I shuddered as I saw the drop of blood vanish the moment it touched the clay. As if the statue truly knew how to drink, the master dipped the talisman into the red oil and pressed it to the statue's forehead. A baby's cry suddenly rang out in the house, clear as day. The flame of the oil lamp flared a vivid, sickly green. Under the coat of red oil, the statue looked as if it had just been dragged out of a pool of blood. The old man handed me a red thread. "Name it. Tie this thread around your wrist. You must never take it off, no matter the reason. Every time you eat, you must call it to eat with you. Every full moon, you must feed it blood. Remember this well, do not let it go hungry, especially not hungry for blood." I tied the thread around my wrist. The thread was thin, but it felt as cold as steel wire. I looked at the statue and muttered, "From now on I will call you B." The crying stopped instantly. A tiny breath brushed against my ear, cold and damp. The master collected his money, hiding it in his sleeve. Fu patted me on the shoulder and chuckled softly. "Congratulations, man. You're a father now." That night, I arrived home close to 1 in the morning. As soon as I opened the gate, my normally aggressive black dog suddenly let out a terrified howl, tucked its tail, and bolted under the bed, whimpering as if it had seen something horrific. I placed the statue, now resting inside a red cloth pouch, on the small table in my bedroom. The moment the pouch touched the wood, the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. The oil lamp on my mother's altar flickered wildly and died. In the darkness, I heard the patter of tiny bare feet running around the porch. I fumbled to find the light switch. The yellow bulb blinked a few times before staying on, illuminating the red pouch sitting dead still. From the bottom seam of the bag, a single drop of dark red oil oozed out, dragging into a long streak like fresh blood. I was terrified, but deep in my eyes, a spark of greed flickered. I whispered, "B, from now on Daddy will raise you. You help Daddy with his business, okay?" Out in the yard, the wind whistled through the banana trees, the leaves rustling together, in a sound that mimicked the soft, answering giggles of a child. That night, I placed the red pouch under my pillow. As soon as I drifted off, I dreamt of a naked infant with deathly pale skin, pitch-black eyes, and bruised purple lips squatting on my chest. It wiped the blood smeared around its mouth and giggled shrilly. "I'm hungry. Feed me, Daddy." I tried to scream, but my throat was paralyzed. The child leaned in close, its breath reeking of sour milk. "If Daddy doesn't feed me, I'm going to eat Daddy." I jerked awake, my back drenched in a cold sweat. Beneath my pillow, the red pouch was gently rising and falling, as if something inside it was breathing. The next morning, the whitewashed wall was covered in tiny footprints. Not just one or two, but dozens of them, crawling from the floor all the way up near the ceiling, smeared and muddy as if tracked in by wet dirt. Every tiny toe was clearly visible, fragile, yet chilling. I reached out and touched them. The mud was dry, but it still carried that foul, fishy stench. I shuddered, but then the corners of my mouth curled up. "You came home, didn't you, B?" From that day on, my business flowed with eerie ease. Every batch of goods I brought in sold out completely. Customers sought me out on their own. The few times I was almost caught in an inspection, I slipped through by a hair's breadth. People in the market started saying I was blessed with luck. I bought milk, sweets, and small toys, bringing them home to place in front of the statue. At every meal, I would set an extra bowl of rice, a pair of chopsticks, and a glass of milk, calling out, "B, come out and eat with Daddy." The bowl of rice would be full at first, but within minutes, it would flatten out, turning stone cold and reeking of a sour, spoiled odor, as if it had been left out for days. Sometimes the glass of milk would bubble up on its own and then drain away, leaving a nauseating metallic smell behind. At first I was frightened to the bone, but as time went on, I grew used to it. I even felt happy, believing these were signs that my child had eaten and that the fortune was rolling in. On the first night of the full moon, I took a razor blade, sliced my fingertip, and let 3 drops of blood fall into the statue's mouth. The blood absorbed incredibly fast. The flame of the oil lamp tilted and swayed, as if an invisible hand had brushed past it. I did the exact same thing in the months that followed, but before long, the child in my dreams began demanding more. It would stand at the foot of my bed, its skin ashen, its eyes sunken deep, speaking in a high-pitched, reedy voice. "Daddy, I need more blood. Give me more blood, Daddy." Terrified of losing my luck, I caught a rooster one day and slit its throat, substituting its blood for my own. That night, the windows rattled violently. The black dog under the bed let out an agonizing, blood-curdling howl, and then went dead silent. I opened my eyes to find the statue lying on my pillow. Its eyes glowed red like burning coals, and its mouth was stretched into a wider grin. A child's voice shrieked right in my ear. "I want Daddy's blood. Daddy's blood, do you understand?" Panicking, I bit down on my own finger until it bled, letting the blood drip into the statue's mouth. The next morning, the black dog was found dead under the bed, its stomach ripped open. Its black blood pooled all over the floor. From then on, I never dared to cheat again. The fortune came in more fiercely than ever. A lottery ticket bought on a whim hit the jackpot. The money from my smuggling runs just kept piling up. I built a new house with a red-tiled roof, brightly painted walls, polished floor tiles, and a high iron gate. I bought a scooter, wore new clothes, wore a watch, and walked through the market with the swagger of a man who had finally escaped poverty. People looked at me with eyes full of respect, curiosity, and envy. But no one knew that every night, behind locked doors, I still quietly sliced my own flesh to feed my blood to the statue inside the red pouch. No one knew that in that brand new house, despite the bright walls, clean floors, and expensive furniture, there was always a cold, damp, moldy stench clinging to the corners, like the smell of graveyard dirt after a rain. And no one knew that I was growing thinner by the day. My cheekbones hollowed out, my eyes were ringed with dark circles, my lips cracked and dry. Many mornings, looking in the mirror, I would flinch, catching sight of the shadowy figure of a child lurking behind my shoulder in the reflection. But when I turned around, there was never anyone there. I tried looking for Fu several times but couldn't find him. He wouldn't answer his phone. He wasn't at his usual stall. Then, on an early autumn morning, while the mist still blurred the market roofs, I went to ask the familiar butcher woman, only to learn that Fu was dead. The woman, who was mid-swing chopping a pork rib, froze and looked at me with pity. "You didn't know? Fu is dead. A traffic accident. Crashed straight into a parked container truck by the side of the road. His body was mashed to pieces. They buried him a few days ago." I stood dead in my tracks. The sounds of the market seemed to drop away. I heard someone add that Fu's house was over in the East Village, and if we were close, I should drop by to light a stick of incense. The road to Fu's house that day was littered with dry almond leaves, the wind rustling crisply under my tires. Fu's house was a spacious 2-story building. The iron gate was left slightly ajar, the yard completely deserted. Fu's wife, Thom, came out to open the door, her face haggard, her eyes red from crying. Inside the house, thick smoke billowed from a newly erected altar. Fu's portrait sat in the center, the eyes in the photo seeming to stare right through me. Thom told me that before he died, Fu had been acting very strangely. At night, he would often go out to the backyard and whisper to himself. He was emaciated, his eyes constantly bulging. He refused to eat, and when called, he wouldn't answer. Once, she woke up to find him sitting on the ground out on the porch, his hands clutching a red cloth pouch, muttering over and over, Daddy knows, don't be angry." Hearing this, an icy chill washed over me. from the back of my neck down my spine. I hastily lit a stick of incense and left. On the way home, the wind howling through the bamboo grove sounded exactly like someone calling after me. I didn't dare turn my head. From that day on, I began to understand that the thing I was raising didn't just give fortune. It was systematically tightening a noose around the necks of those who had called it their child. But understanding is one thing. Letting it go is another matter entirely. The money was still flowing in. My house was still the brightest in the village. People still gasped in awe when they saw me riding my new bike past the market. And greed, once it has been fed to its heart's content, does not easily accept going hungry again. I simply became more careful. I made offerings exactly on time, called it to every meal without fail, and fed it more blood whenever there was a strange noise in the house. I thought that as long as I knew my place, the thing would leave me in peace. But the house grew colder and colder. There were nights I woke up to find tiny puddles of water on my polished tile floor, shaped exactly like the footprints of a child who had just run past. Some days, the bowl of rice meant for B wasn't just half empty, but had 5 deep finger marks gouged into it, as if a starving child had shoveled the food in with both hands. Some nights I would hear giggling on the ceiling. Looking up, I would see a small dark shadow crawling rapidly across the wooden beams before vanishing. In the midst of that vast freezing house, Leanne walked into my life. It was a late winter morning, when the district market was blanketed in fog, and the smell of coal smoke from the noodle and porridge stands rose up to mingle with the scent of river fish, bruised vegetables, and damp earth after the night's rain. I didn't actually need to buy anything that day. I had come down to the market because I was terrified of being alone in my house for too long. The bigger the house got, the smaller it made me feel, and every time the wind swept through the hallway, I felt as if a child was crawling right behind me. I was sitting and drinking green tea at the edge of the market, my hands tucked into my sleeves to hide the fresh cuts, when Auntie Tu Hao, a dried goods vendor who had known me since my rickety motorbike days, came over and sat beside me. She stared at me for a long time, her older eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and pity. "Listen here, Loy. You're doing quite well for yourself now. You've got a house, you've got money, your parents are gone. How long can you keep living all alone? When a man lives alone for too long, his house turns cold." The word cold made me flinch. Auntie Tu continued, "I have a niece named Lian. Her parents passed away early, and she's lived with her aunt since she was little. She's gentle, responsible, and doesn't chase after vanity. If you want, I can play matchmaker. Once there's a woman in the house, the sound of cooking and life, your days will finally warm up again." I remained silent. I hadn't thought about marrying ever since I brought Bai home. I was terrified that someone would step into my house and discover the bowls of spoiled rice, the streaks of blood, the sound of a child calling out in the dead of night. But right at that moment, I saw a married couple in the market picking out vegetables together. The wife took a towel and wiped the sweat from her husband's brow, and the husband bent down to help carry her basket. Such an ordinary scene, yet it made my chest ache violently. I suddenly craved the sound of a real human voice calling me to dinner, craved a warm hand resting on my forehead when I had a fever, craved a breathing presence beside me in the night, one that didn't smell like incense, didn't smell like blood. And so, I nodded. The first time I met Lian, I didn't find her stunningly beautiful in a way that made people dizzy. She wore a faded light blue baba shirt that had been washed many times, her hair tied low at the nape of her neck. Her skin was fair but unassuming. Her eyes were pitch black, clear, and carried a hint of sadness, the eyes of someone who had endured a lot of loss but hadn't yet learned to be bitter. She spoke softly, her smiles were always faint, and her hands rested neatly on her lap. In the tea shop behind the market, Auntie Tu Hao sat between us, smoothing over the conversation, while Lian only occasionally glanced up at me. Her gaze didn't scrutinize the money I had, nor did it light up at the mention of my new house or new bike. She spent more time looking at my dark, sunken eyes than at the watch on my wrist. When Auntie Tu stood up to buy more tea, Lian suddenly asked in a quiet voice, "You can't sleep, can you?" I was startled. I forced a smile. "Why do you ask?" Lian looked down at her teacup. "Your eyes are red. You're terribly thin, too. A man with money isn't necessarily a healthy man. To me, you look more like a man carrying a lot of worries than a man full of joy." Those words were spoken so gently, yet they touched a tender spot inside my heart that hadn't been touched in a very long time. I couldn't find the words to answer. From then on, I started going out of my way to see Lien. Lien knew nothing about the Kuman Thong. All she knew was that I was a man who had suffered, had finally made it, but lived a deeply lonely life. During our subsequent meetings, she often brought me small batches of homemade sponge cake, sometimes a bunch of ladyfinger bananas, or a bottle of medicated oil, because she noticed I coughed a lot in the early mornings. Once, while sitting under the awning of Auntie Tu's house in the drizzling rain, Lien looked at my wrist, exposed beneath my sleeve, and saw several thin cuts that had just begun to scar over. She froze but didn't ask right away. A moment later, she simply said in a soft voice, "Whatever you do for a living, you have to protect your health. Making all that money means nothing if you're too broken to enjoy it." I turned my face away, feeling both warmed and terrified inside. The warmth came from Lien's pure, uncalculated care. The terror came from knowing that in this world, nothing ever came to me without a heavy price to pay. Our wedding wasn't massive, but it was lively enough. The neighbors came for the feast, everyone saying I was a blessed man, getting rich and then snagging such a gentle wife. Lien wore a red eye, her makeup light, her eyes holding a mix of shyness and hope. As she stepped through the gates of my house, the wind in the yard suddenly died down completely. The new house had been scrubbed clean that day, the furniture polished, fresh flowers set on the tables, the smell of hot food overpowering the usual cold, damp stench. I watched Lien smiling at our relatives, listening to the clinking of bowls, the chatter of voices, the neighborhood kids running and playing in the yard. For the first time in months, I felt like I still had a chance to live as a normal human being. But that night, after the guests had left, after Lien took off her wedding dress, washed her face, and brought me a warm bowl of ginger tea, she suddenly stopped right in front of the bedroom door. "Inside our room, why is it so cold on?" I froze. On the table in the corner, the red cloth pouch sat dead still beneath a towel I had deliberately draped over it. I forced a laugh. "It's a newly built house. The tile floors are just cold, that's all." Lien looked at me, then looked at the corner of the room, but she didn't ask again. In the early days of our marriage, Lien truly transformed the house. She woke up early every morning to sweep the yard, opened the doors to let the sunlight in, dragged the blankets out to dry cooked hot rice, and placed a small vase of flowers on my mother's altar. She had never known my mother, but every day she wiped her portrait with a clean cloth, lit incense, and whispered, "Mother, please bless us to live in peace." Many times I stood behind the door, watching her do these things, a lump forming in my throat. The house that once only echoed with the wind and insects now held the sound of a knife chopping vegetables, boiling water, and Lien calling me to dinner. She noticed I ate very little, so she often scooped extra soup or picked out pieces of fish from my bowl, reminding me not to smoke so much. One night, I ran a severe fever, unclear if it was from blood loss or sheer terror, my body shaking violently even though the weather wasn't cold. Lien stayed awake almost the entire night, cooking scallion porridge, wiping my face with a warm towel, rubbing medicated oil on my chest, and sitting by the edge of the bed holding my hand. Through my delirium, I heard B's voice calling "Daddy" from the corner of the room, and then I felt Lien's hand squeeze mine tight. So warm and so real that I burst into tears. Thinking I was in physical pain, Lien leaned down and asked, "Where does it hurt? Tell me." I only shook my head, my tears soaking into my hair. It had been so long since anyone had cared for me like this. Lien's love made me feel both saved and utterly unworthy of saving. But the thing in the red cloth pouch did not like Lien's presence. It started with small things. She would hang the laundry out to dry in the yard, and when she returned, she would find a child's red shirt hanging right between our clothes, soaking wet, dripping black water onto the ground. She thought it had blown over from a neighbor's house, but when she picked it up, it was freezing cold and smelled foul, like river mud. One evening, while Lien was washing dishes in the kitchen, she heard a soft giggling right behind her. She turned around and saw a tiny hand reach out from under the table, then violently yank back into the shadows. She called out to me. I ran down, but the space under the table was completely empty. I told her it was probably just a rat. Lien didn't argue, but that night, she held me very tightly in bed. Another day, while mopping the floor, she discovered the trail of wet tiny footprints on the freshly cleaned tiles, running straight from the bedroom door to the dining table, stopping perfectly in front of the chair opposite where I usually sat. The footprints were so small that if they belonged to a human, it could only be a toddler. But we had no children in the house. Lian began to be afraid, but she didn't run away. She loved me more than she feared for herself. She noticed me waking up in the dead of night, slipping into the inner room, and shutting the door ever so softly. She heard my muffled whispers, the metallic scrape of a razor blade, my stifled gasps of pain as I tried to hold back my screams. One time, she couldn't take it anymore. She stood outside the door and called out, "An Lui, open the door for me." Inside went dead silent. A long time later, I finally opened it, my face pale green, my hands hidden behind my back. Lian looked past me and saw a small cup stained with blood and the red cloth pouch resting on the table. Her voice trembled as she asked, "What are you hiding from me?" I shook my head, claiming it was nothing. Lian didn't cry, didn't scream. She just stepped forward and pulled my hands out into the open. The overlapping cuts on my fingertips and wrists were clearly visible under the light. She stared at them, her eyes brimming with red. "How long have you been doing this to yourself?" I couldn't answer. Lian took a clean cloth and bandaged my hands. Her own hands were shaking, but her touch was incredibly gentle. She spoke softly, enunciating every word as if she were afraid of shattering me. "If you're in trouble, tell me. I am your wife. I don't need a big house. I don't need a lot of money. I just need you to be alive and living a decent life beside me." It was those exact words that made me break. I collapsed onto the floor, buried my head in my hands, and confessed everything. I told her about Fu, the house in the woods, the master, the statue, the blood, the dead black dog, Fu's horrific death, and the voices calling me daddy in the middle of the night. The more I spoke, the whiter Lian's face became. But she didn't leave. She sat down on the floor right in front of me, clutching my hands, even though they still smelled of copper and blood. "Let's leave, An," she said. "We can abandon this house. We can lose the money. It's okay. I will go with you. We'll go somewhere else and start over. Raise it anymore." I looked at her as if looking at a door that had just swung open in a pitch-black room. One part of me wanted to stand up immediately, pack a few clothes, and leave it all behind. But the other part, the part that had grown addicted to the money, the luck, the admiring stares of the world, dragged me back down. I said, "Let me figure it out. We can't just drop it overnight. I'm terrified it will hurt you." Lian gripped my hands tighter. "That's exactly why we have to stop. The more you fear it, the more you cannot let it stay here." In the corner of the room, the red cloth pouch gave a faint twitch. We both whipped around. Beneath the fabric, it looked as if something was smiling. From that night on, Lian tried to pull me toward the light in her own quiet way. She never touched the red pouch, but every morning she threw all the doors wide open to let the sun in, burned pomelo leaves to cleanse the air, changed the flowers on my mother's altar, and cooked hot meals, compelling me to sit down and eat with her. Whenever she saw me about to stand up and carry a bowl of rice into the bedroom for B, she would hold my arm down. "Finish eating with me first." Once, when I was violently shaking because the full moon had arrived, Lian placed a bowl of hot porridge in front of me, brought me a cup of sugar water to drink, and gently rebandaged my old cuts. She didn't call me stupid, didn't scold me for my greed, didn't say words to humiliate me further. She simply said, "You've been tricked by it, but a man who's been tricked still has a way back, as long as you're willing to turn around." That sentence hurt me more than any curse ever could, because it gave me hope, and in this house, hope was the most dangerous thing of all. Bai began to react more violently. The bowl of rice in the bedroom would be violently smashed to the floor even when no one had touched it. The milk in the cup would curdle and turn a pale, fleshy pink. At night, Lian would hear fingernails scratching wildly under the bed. Once, she woke up in the middle of the night to find me standing in front of the small altar in our room, my eyes wide open in a sleepwalking trance, holding a razor blade to my wrist. Lian lunged forward and wrestled it away from me. I snapped awake, terrified, and threw my arms around her. In that exact second, from the corner of the room came a child's ear-piercing shriek, so furious, so drawn out that the light bulb on the ceiling blew out with a sharp pop. In the darkness, Lian felt an icy little hand grab her ankle. She looked down, only to see a thin streak of blood on the floor, dragging all the way from her foot to the red cloth pouch. The next morning, her ankle bore the dark purple bruise of 5 tiny fingers. She tried to hide it from me, but I saw it anyway. I stared at the bruise, the color draining from my face. Lian pulled her pant leg down, forcing a smile. "It's nothing. I probably just bumped into the bed frame." I knew she was lying to protect me from terror, and it was her very gentleness that tore me apart with guilt. An innocent woman had stepped into this house, not out of greed, not for fortune, but simply because she wanted to be my wife. And now, she too was being hunted by the monstrosity I had invited in. Then, Leanne got pregnant. The news arrived on a morning of light, drizzling rain. She stood in the kitchen doorway, holding the pregnancy test in her hand, her eyes a mixture of pure joy and profound fear. I stared at her, my mind going completely blank for a few seconds, before I suddenly burst into tears. I dropped to my knees, wrapping my arms around her belly, stammering out, "Our child, Leanne, our child." Leanne stroked my hair, tears falling from her own eyes. In that fleeting moment the house truly felt warm. The rain outside the porch seemed to quiet down. The smell of porridge in the kitchen was fragrant and soft, and the hand Leanne rested on my head trembled, but was full of hope. But from the inner room a faint sound echoed. Thud, thud, thud. Just like the 3 taps of the old master's cane all those years ago. I snapped my head up. Leanne turned to look as well. The red cloth pouch in the corner had somehow fallen to the floor, its mouth gaping open. Inside, the small statue was tilted outward, its twisted smile lurking in the shadows. That night, Leanne dreamt of an ashen-skinned child standing beside an empty crib. It stared at her stomach and said, "This house already has 1 child. That's enough." She woke up clutching her belly, her whole body freezing cold. From the moment I learned Leanne was pregnant, I finally made the decision to sever my ties with the charm. I searched frantically for Fu, only to remember Fu was dead. I searched for the master's house, only to find an empty, ruined foundation. I secretly asked around among the veteran smugglers. Anyone who heard the words Kuman Thong recoiled in fear, some cursing my stupidity before walking away. Finally, an old man selling incense at the night market whispered to me, "Something that has tasted blood cannot be abandoned with mere words. If you want to sever it, you need a powerful master. But be careful. It knows before you even betray it." I returned home to find Leanne sitting on the porch, mending my old shirt. The afternoon sun fell onto her hair, soft and faded. She looked up and smiled at me, a tired but infinitely gentle smile. "I made chicken porridge. Come eat a little. You've gotten so thin lately." I stood there looking at her for a long, long time, my throat suddenly tightening. I thought to myself that if I hadn't met Fu that day, if I hadn't stepped into that house in the woods, if I hadn't clutched that statue to my chest, I might still be dirt poor. But perhaps I would have married Leanne in a tiny, humble shack, eating cheap braised fish, listening to the cries of a real baby instead of a ghost calling me daddy in the dark. The poverty of my past suddenly seemed strangely kind compared to the terrifying wealth of my present. That night I took the red cloth pouch out into the yard. Leanne stood behind the door, hands protecting her stomach, her eyes rimmed with red. I dug a deep hole beneath the banana tree, threw the statue in, poured kerosene over it, and set it on fire. The flames burned a sickly green, emitting cold instead of heat. The smoke billowing up smelled of burnt hair, spoiled milk, and dried blood. From within the fire came the sound of a child crying, soft at first, then growing louder, shrieking in agony as if it were being strangled. Leanne held her stomach, tears streaming down her face, but she gritted her teeth and stood her ground. I grabbed the hoe and frantically shoveled dirt over the fire, chanting over and over, "Daddy is sorry. Daddy can't raise you anymore. Let Daddy go. Let Daddy's wife and child go." The ground beneath my feet suddenly trembled. From out of the pit, a tiny hand made of black smoke reached up, clawed at the edge of the dirt, and then dissipated. Leanne screamed. I dragged her inside, locked the door, and jammed a chair under the handle. That night we sat huddled together until dawn, neither daring to sleep. Up on the roof, the heavy footsteps of a child stomped back and forth. Near dawn, the footsteps stopped right above our heads, and a fragile, high-pitched voice whispered through the wooden ceiling, "Did Daddy bury me, Daddy?" When morning came, the red cloth pouch was sitting on the dining table, bone dry, perfectly clean. The statue inside didn't have a single scratch. Sitting right in front of it was the bowl of chicken porridge Leanne had cooked the night before, now turned jet black, thick as sludge, and reeking of rot. Seeing it, Leanne staggered and almost collapsed. I held her tight, my entire body shuddering as if seized by a violent fever. From that day on, Leanne's health deteriorated rapidly. She suffered from constant, dull abdominal pains. Her nights were plagued with tossing and turning, and she had horrific nightmares. Once, she dreamt she was cradling a newborn baby, but when she looked down, the infant in her arms had no face, only a gaping blood-red maw suckling blood from her breast. She woke up sobbing silently. I sat beside her, utterly powerless. able only to grip her hand. I ruined you, I choked out. I ruined our child. Exhausted, Leon shook her head and reached out to wipe my tears. It's not over yet, An. As long as we're alive, there's a way. Don't give up. It was only in that exact moment that my love for Leon truly conquered my greed. But the things that dwell in the dark do not let go just because a human learns to regret too late. On a gray, rainy afternoon, Leon said she wanted to go stay at Auntie Two house for a few days. Not because she was angry with me, but because she was terrified this house was poisoning the baby. I hesitated, but looking at my wife's deathly pale face, I had to nod before leaving. Leon cooked me a pot of porridge, laid my medicine out on the table, and made me promise to eat on time, to stop smoking, and to never cut my own wrists again. She stood on the porch steps, holding a small bag of clothes, her belly just barely beginning to show beneath her loose shirt. The rain fell softly behind her. I suddenly had the gut-wrenching feeling that if I let her walk through the gate right now, I would never see her return. I held her hand with desperate strength. Leon smiled, exhausted but tender. I'm only going for a few days. Stay here and don't be afraid. Tomorrow I'll ask my aunt to find a master to help us. Then she reached up and touched my face, just as she used to do on the nights I ran a fever. You have to live, not for the money anymore. For me, for our child. I nodded, but my tears were already spilling over. Leon turned and walked away. The moment she stepped through the gate, from deep within the bedroom, a child's giggling echoed out. Very soft, very close. By late afternoon I received the news. Leon had been hit by a truck near the old bridge. Her motorbike was thrown to the side, her bag tossed into the ditch, and the few oranges she had bought for me were left rolling in the mud. People said that right before the crash, witnesses saw Leanne slam on her brakes as if swerving to avoid a child running across the road. But on that stretch of road at that time, there was no child. When I arrived at the hospital, the long corridors reeked of harsh disinfectant, and the white fluorescent lights burned my eyes. Auntie Tu Hao collapsed outside the emergency room door, sobbing without making a sound. I walked in and saw Leanne lying beneath a white sheet. Her face was ashen, her lips purple, her hair still clinging with raindrops and mud. One of her hands was resting over her stomach, the fingers curled inward, as if even in her final second she was desperately trying to shield the child that never had the chance to form. I stood there looking at her for a long, long time, unable to cry at first. The agony was so immense it left me completely hollow. Then, as the nurse gently pulled the sheet up higher, I finally screamed, a scream that ripped through my throat, no longer sounding like a human voice. Leanne's funeral took place under a relentless downpour. The smoke of incense mingled with the smell of wet earth, mourning clothes, and wilting tuberose. I knelt beside the coffin, my head bowed to the floor, refusing to eat or drink, shoving away anyone who tried to help me up. People pitied Leanne, lamenting her tragic fate, dying so brutally just shortly after getting married. No one knew that back in my house, the small bowl of rice placed in the bedroom that night drained itself completely dry. The cup of milk turned crimson like pure blood, and the statue resting inside the red cloth pouch wore a smile that had stretched even wider. As the coffin was lowered into the grave, I clawed at the wooden edge until my fingers bled, screaming Leanne's name until my voice gave out. The dirt fell onto the coffin lid, shovel by heavy shovel. Amidst the pouring rain and the sound of wailing, I suddenly heard it, so distinctly in my ear. The bright, cheerful laugh of a child. Daddy still has me. After burying Leanne, I returned to the empty house. The things Leanne had once touched were still there. The rag she used to wipe the tables hung on the line. The bottle of medicated oil she placed by the bed. The pot of porridge she cooked before leaving had spoiled, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it out. On my mother's altar, the vase of flowers Leanne had arranged was dead and drooping. The entire house felt as if it had lost its very last breath of warmth. That night, I sat in the middle of the bedroom, staring at the red cloth pouch. I didn't call Bai out to eat. I didn't offer blood. I only glared at the statue with bloodshot eyes. You killed my wife, I rasped. The pouch remained silent. You killed my child. In the pitch black, a child's deep sigh echoed from inside the bag, followed by a fragile, innocent voice. Daddy belongs to me. I sprang up like a madman, grabbed a hammer and smashed it down onto the statue. The hammer striking the clay let out a dry, cracking thud, but the statue did not break. I smashed it again and again, until my own hands tore open and my blood splattered across the statue's face. The statue sat dead still, its mouth locked in a grin. My blood dripped onto its lips and vanished instantly. From somewhere deep inside the house came the faint, sickening sound of someone swallowing. I stumbled backward, my face as pale as a corpse. I suddenly realized that even my boundless rage was feeding it. I fled into the night, carrying the statue, and hurled it into the black river. The water swallowed the red pouch without a sound. I stood on the riverbank, panting heavily, the rain whipping my face. But when I stumbled back into my house, the red pouch was already sitting in the dead center of my bed, soaking wet, dripping black water onto the mattress. I dug a hole and buried it in the backyard. By morning, I found it sitting on my dining table. I took it to the graveyard and abandoned it among the nameless, forgotten tombs. That night I opened my eyes to find the statue resting squarely on my chest, freezing cold and heavy as a real child. I stopped going to the market. I stopped seeing people. The house was bolted shut. During the day, neighbors saw the curtains tightly drawn. At night they saw a sickly red glow emanating from within, like an oil lamp burning behind a veil of blood. Passers-by would hear me crying inside, sometimes begging for mercy, sometimes screaming curses, sometimes softly humming a lullaby as if rocking a baby to sleep. People said I had gone completely insane over my wife's death. No one dared to go near. On the night of a full moon, a torrential storm began dumping rain at dusk. The violent winds made the iron gate of my house shriek and groan. Inside, I sat before the dining table. In front of me were 2 bowls of rice, a large one completely cold, a small one placed next to a cup of milk. The red cloth pouch sat on the chair opposite me. I had grown so emaciated that my cheekbones seemed glued directly to my skull, my eyes hollow pits, my lips cracked and bleeding. My wrists were crisscrossed with a horrifying number of scars. I stared at the empty chair across from me and whispered, "B, Daddy is tired." There was no answer. "Daddy wants to see Mother Leon. Daddy wants to see Daddy's real baby." The house remained dead silent. Then from beneath the table came the soft patter of bare feet. A tiny grayish-blue hand gripped the edge of the chair. Then, a round head slowly peeked over. The child from my nightmares was sitting in the chair opposite me. Its skin the color of ash, its eyes black voids, its mouth smeared red. It grinned. "Feed me, Daddy." I stared at it for a very long time. Then I started to laugh. A dry, broken, gasping laugh that no longer sounded like a living human being. I picked up a razor blade. The lights in the house flickered wildly. Out in the yard the rain was roaring so loud it swallowed all other sounds. Yet the neighbors living nearby still recounted that, cutting through the thunderous rain, they heard a horrific, endless scream tearing out from my house. The scream didn't end quickly. It dragged on, choking on blood, then morphed into a wretched sobbing until it was finally, abruptly cut off, as if a hand had been clamped tight over my mouth. The next morning, the doors to my house were thrown wide open. The rain had stopped, the yard was littered with fallen leaves, and muddy puddles had formed, glowing and eerie, rusted red like the color of the earth. People called out from the gate, but no one answered. When a few of the neighborhood men finally gathered the courage to step inside, the house was freezing cold. The furniture was perfectly intact. The money was still in the cabinet. My motorbike was still parked in the yard. But I was gone. On the bedroom floor were dozens of tiny bloody footprints, running in circles around the bed before crawling straight up the walls, all the way to the ceiling. On the dining table sat 2 bowls of rice. The small bowl was half empty. The large bowl was filled to the brim with a dark red coagulated liquid that reeked of raw iron. On the chair opposite, the red cloth pouch sat perfectly neat, as if someone had just gently placed it there. No one dared to open it. But a neighbor's little boy, standing outside the door, went deathly pale and whispered that he had just seen something inside the pouch smile at him. The adults angrily shushed him and scrambled to drag each other out of the house. After that, the house was abandoned. Weeds choked the entryway. Moss swallowed the front steps. Every time the wind blew, the rusting iron gate would creak and groan, sounding exactly like someone grinding their teeth in the dark. People never mentioned my name again. Nor did anyone dare to mention Leanne when walking past our house. Only on the nights of the full moon did the locals occasionally see a faint, flickering yellow light seeping out from the bedroom window of that abandoned house. Even though the power lines had been cut long ago, if you stood close enough, you could hear my voice whispering ever so softly, "B, come out and eat with Daddy." And immediately after, a child's laughter, clear, innocent, and bright, would echo out into the night, mingling with the scent of cold incense and the relentless chirping of insects in the overgrown yard. In the deepest, darkest corner of that bedroom where the light could never reach, the red cloth pouch still sat dead still. Inside, the small statue tilted its face toward the door, its round, blood-red eyes staring, the corners of its mouth curled up into a smile, as if patiently waiting for another hand to come and open it.